You know that feeling when a friend asks, "I need a cutter that can handle my metal projects without blowing my budget, but I'm scared I'll end up with something that just sits in the corner collecting dust?" I've been there. I've spent evenings scrolling through specs, watching endless demo videos, and even reaching out to a few owners in forums just to make sure I wasn't buying a glorified paperweight. If you're on that same fence, the link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's walk through why the ZQJYMXM plasma cutter with its built-in compressor might be the answer you're looking for or why it could be a mismatch. First off, plasma cutters are a unique beast. They sit somewhere between a high-powered torch and a precision CNC tool. You get a lot of cutting power, but you also need a reliable air source, a clear readout for voltage and amperage, and a machine that doesn't demand a whole workshop's worth of space. Most entry-level models either ship without an air compressor, forcing you to buy a separate unit, or they skimp on the display, leaving you guessing whether you're cutting at the right settings. The ZQJYMXM tries to solve those two headaches by bundling a compressor right inside the chassis and giving you a large LED digital display that shows everything from input voltage to cut speed at a glance. Who should actually consider this setup? If you're a hobbyist who spends weekends building custom steel frames, a small auto body shop that needs to cut thin to medium thick sheet metal, or a maintenance tech who occasionally slices rusted bolts or pipe, this machine hits a sweet spot. The integrated compressor means you don't have to hunt for a separate air tank, and the LED screen lets you dial in the exact amperage without pulling out a separate meter. All of that adds up to less downtime and fewer extra parts to keep track of. For folks who are just getting into plasma work, the user-friendly design translates into a gentler learning curve. No need to juggle a compressor hose and a cutter arm separately. On the flip side, if you run a full-scale fabrication shop that cuts a quarter-inch steel and thicker on a daily basis, you might find the built-in compressor underpowered for continuous heavy-duty use. Larger industrial units typically pair a high-capacity air compressor with a separate cutting head to sustain long runs without overheating. The ZQJYMXM's compressor is great for intermittent cuts, but could struggle if you try to push it non-stop for hours. Also, because it's marketed as a non-high-frequency cutter, the arc ignition isn't as instant as the high-frequency models you see on the shop floor. That means you may notice a slight delay when you first pull the trigger, which can be a nuisance if you're doing a lot of start-stop work. Let's get into the practical strengths that matter once the box is opened. The first thing you'll notice is the LED digital display. It's not just a tiny flicker, it's a sizable screen that shows real-time voltage, amperage, and even the pressure coming from the built-in compressor. When you're slicing a piece of 12-gauge steel, you can see at a glance whether you're staying within the optimal range, which helps you avoid wasted consumables or uneven cuts. The integrated compressor is another big win. You won't need to buy an external tank, and the system is already calibrated to match the cutter's airflow requirements, so you spend less time tweaking and more time actually cutting. The weaknesses are subtle but worth noting. Because the compressor is tucked inside, the overall unit is a bit heavier than a stripped-down cutter, making it less portable if you need to move it from a garage to a job site every day. The non-high-frequency ignition also translates to a slightly louder startup, and while that's not a deal-breaker for most hobbyists, it can be a minor annoyance in a quiet workshop. Finally, the cutting capacity, while advertised as powerful, really shines on thin to medium-gauge metals. Think 10 to 14-gauge steel, aluminum, and mild steel. If you try to push it into a quarter-inch CH or thicker without adjusting parameters, you'll notice slower feed rates and a higher chance of the cutter stalling. A real-world scenario that helped me gauge the machine's sweet spot was a weekend project where I was building a custom bike frame from 12-gauge steel tubing. I needed clean, precise cuts around the bends, and the ZQJYMXM's LED readout let me keep the amperage steady while the built-in compressor kept the airflow consistent. I didn't have to pause to swap out hoses or repressurize a separate tank, just press the trigger, watch the cut, and move on. The result was a series of tight, clean edges that fit together nicely, and I spent less than an hour on what would have taken me twice as long with a less integrated setup. Another practical example comes from a friend who maintains a small farm. He often needs to trim rusted steel brackets and cut through pipe that's been sitting outdoors.